people, sometimes it takes them a little bit longer to get across town. So yes, we do have a new handout. It's only taken us, 4 weeks, I think? I just gave up, Ernie. I'm like, y'all can read it. We're going to go to the next sheet. No, it's been good. Yeah, you're running out of room, huh? So the space to the right is for you to take notes if you want. And then some chicken tortilla soup. So hopefully that is yummy for you guys. I doubled it, so I wasn't sure how it turned out. And hopefully there's enough salt. I like salt.
Tastes good.
Okay, very good. Very good.
Really, really.
Okay, so we're gonna again be interactive, share things that are relevant or helpful for one another, anything that we can pray for you guys as well. But we're going to the flip side of identity, because we've spent a lot of time going over like fear and negative thought patterns that we have toward ourselves. Now I want to talk to you about the flip side. And I would be curious if either in the past or even in the present, if you've struggled in this area at all. I would say for my personality, definitely have had both experiences where I've been negative toward myself, but also I've had times where I've been prideful. And I think you're going to learn something about Cain and Abel that you've never heard before. So it'll be, I think, very eye-opening for you guys. So the main idea on this lesson is that if the enemy cannot deflate you, he will inflate you. Okay? Both are rooted in insecurity. Both. So if you see people that, like, I'll never forget a doctor once when I went to my appointment. He literally patted himself on the back as he was bragging about himself, and I thought, is this a joke? I didn't expect that, and no, it wasn't. He was definitely whatever you would call that. I'm not sure what you would call that. Most people tend to hide their arrogance. He didn't. So it's crucial also to understand that false humility and pride are the same coin. Okay? So the false humility that we've discussed, where you're hard on yourself, you self-deprecate, all of those things, is the same coin as being prideful or arrogant or taking too much confidence from your accomplishments. So a false humility is saying less than God is saying about you, and a prideful situation is saying more than God is saying about you, right? Mm-hmm. So we're going to look at that in Genesis chapter 4. I studied this probably about 20 plus years ago, and it was one of my favorite revelations. And I would say one of the ones that really, the difference between hearing something and it blessing you and then something becoming a part of you is revelation, and receiving the word is an active exercise. And so when I learned this, it was one of those where it was very much revelation for me, and it stuck. So that neuron and firing and wiring together situation occurred. So we're going to look at verse 1 and then all the way up to 7 in chapter 4. You're such a cutie. Okay. So this is post-fall, right? And it says, "Now Adam knew his wife Eve, and she conceived and bore Cain, and said, I have acquired a man from the Lord." So that phrase is very important. "Then she bore again, this time his brother Abel. Now Abel was a keeper of sheep, but Cain was a tiller of the ground. And in the process of time, it came to pass that Cain brought an offering of the fruit of the ground to the Lord. Abel also brought of the firstborn of his flock and of their fat. And the Lord respected Abel and his offering, but he did not respect Cain and his. And Cain was very angry, and his countenance fell. So the Lord said to Cain, Why are you angry, and why has your countenance fallen? If you do well, will you not be accepted? And if you do not do well, sin lies at the door, and its desire is for you, but you should rule over it." Okay, there's so much going on in this verse. I want to go back to first, the groundwork is what God originally told Eve post-fall, right? So in your notes in verse 13 of chapter 3, the Lord told Eve, "I will put enmity or hatred between you and the woman, or I'm sorry, he told the serpent, between you and the woman, and between your seed and her seed, he shall bruise your head, and you shall bruise his heel. Okay, so we've got where Adam and Eve are probably feeling that terrible, gut-wrenching feeling we've all experienced when we've made a mistake. And this is a big one. You know what I mean? Like, this isn't just any little mistake. All of mankind is now in a fallen state. And they've been driven from the garden, and they're having those consequences, and there's nothing they can do to fix it. It is what it is, and they now have this new reality. God, being redemptive in nature, always promises a seed that is coming. Adam and Eve didn't know when the seed was going to arrive, and neither did the serpent. So it's up in the air. Okay, so with that in mind, you then have their firstborn son. Now, they were twins, okay, because where it says that she conceived and bore Cain, then she bore Abel. So the Hebrew Aramaic language is that she had twins. Because typically you'll see conceived and bore, conceived and bore. It's rare that you'll see conceived and then bore. Makes sense? So you've got the twin factor. You also have that Cain is the firstborn. Abel is the second. If any of you in the room are firstborns, you know firstborn syndrome is 100%, middle child syndrome, 100% and baby, right? I mean, that's just the thing. So as a firstborn for Adam and Eve, could Cain be the seed? Okay, so you're going to have this dynamic playing out, and I'll prove it to you. So the word, or the name of Cain, and it's in your notes, is a Hebrew word that comes from another Hebrew word that's very interesting. It means fixity or a lance as striking fast, and a spear. A spear is obviously a long stabbing weapon, and then the affinity is to another Hebrew word that's related to Eve's statement where she said, I have acquired a man from the Lord. Now, that word, acquired, means buy, get, purchase, possess, or recover, redeemed. So names are very important. I feel that Adam and Eve, by what they named Cain, felt that he was the seed that was going to redeem them, and he was going to crush the enemy's head, because there's a military aspect to his name as well. Okay, now picture Cain being raised in that assumption. So you have the firstborn. He adopts the occupation of his father, which was a farmer. And he is probably the one that is going to redeem mankind from the curse. Then you have Abel's name, which literally means vanity, breath, or nothing.
Oh, wow.
Isn't that crazy?
That is crazy.
So basically, he was a bonus for no reason. So they named him nothing. And you can imagine, I mean, I don't know, but I would feel a little bit weird if my parents called me nothing, right? So we've got this whole thing, this whole dynamic that is forming, because again, we don't want to read the scriptures in a sterile setting. You've got real humans that had real emotions and ideas and perceptions and all of the things that were causing them to interact with each other in a way that was either going to be hurtful or harmful. Okay, so does that groundwork make sense to you guys? Mm-hmm. Okay, so then the word she used for man is important as well, because it's the Hebrew word ish. So wherever you see ish, it's a man or a husband, of course, contrasted to a woman or wife, but it also means champion and great man. So the English equivalent we have is gentleman. So it's a higher level, right? You got dude, you got guy, but when you use the word gentleman, right, we're at a different level when it comes to the male gender. So Abel, of course, he is, to them, nothing. One definition of vanity is pointless. And, I don't know. I like to ponder things, and I would be kind of like, I'm not sure. I mean, we don't need 2 kids if it's 1 seed. So it would cause me to, okay, Holy Spirit, or I probably wouldn't know how to do that, but, it's like, God, you gave us 2 sons. That would cause me to maybe question, my thoughts on Cain. Like, maybe I have this incorrect. Only one is needed. But you've got this situation of the firstborn. You've got this situation of all the expectations on him to redeem mankind. And then you have his brother is nothing. So the relationship dynamic between Cain and Abel, I mean, how do you think it's going to be?
Right.
Oh, sorry.
Abel would have a lot of resentment.
Yeah.
I think Abel would definitely, and I think Cain would probably look down on him.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay? And then you got the kid brother. Even though they're twins, it's still the baby.
So now we have better than and not enough.
Mm-hmm. Yep. It gets a little bit crazier too, but I got to take a quick rabbit trail for you guys because this is nuts. Okay? So in verse... Let me see where it is. Verse 3, where it says, in the process of time, that literally means at the end of the days. So the Bible is very prophetic in nature. The stories are meant to teach us. They're examples. We're going to see the dynamic, and we saw it with Jesus. The Lord is very much into patterns. The dynamic that you've got is the firstborn harming the baby. And as we continue through the story, you're going to see how it's very prophetic picture. But you also have Israel being the firstborn, right? And then persecuting the church, because that's exactly what they did, the baby. Okay, so there's definitely that dynamic that occurs spiritually in situations in our story of history. We also have a foreshadowing of a situation that Daniel talked about. So he prophesied that there would be a conflict between the sons of Greece and the sons of Zion. And if you look at the sons of Greece, I think Cain was probably very cerebral. When you look at the religious scholars, they were very much reasoning and head focused, and they did not understand faith. Okay? The sons of Zion were, or what you would call the sons of Greece. So if you look at Greece, they're very cerebral. They're also passionate though, but our architecture, our history, literature, their reasoning, the great philosophers. So we're going to see an end time battle between those that live in their head and those that live in faith. So the best thing you can do is be a person of faith, because there is going to be a battle. Jesus talked about it in Matthew 24, where brother would betray brother, parent would betray parent. The thing, or child, the thing is with Zion is when you're living in Zion, you're living in worship, because that's what Zion was all about. You could live in Jerusalem and not dwell in Zion, but you couldn't live in Zion and not dwell in Jerusalem. So what that means is faith and worship. If you look at the way to keep your shield of faith from cracking, it was made out of leather, and so they have to anoint it. They would have to oil it up. The anointing is presence. And so presence is cultivated in worship. And worship isn't just music. It's a heart attitude 24/7. Okay? So I just wanted to kind of give you guys a little bit of a prophetic picture that you can be thinking about as we go. All right, so Cain brought the labor of his hands. And we know that the offering itself, there's nothing wrong with it, because later in the law, harvest offerings were required. Wave offerings where you'd have to, I think the wheat, the grain, you would wave it before the Lord. So there actually was nothing wrong with what he brought. And then Cain brought the firstborn and the fat, which is very interesting to me, because both of them seem like great offerings. I'd be like, thanks, Cain, for bringing the work of your hands, right? We tithe, we give offerings, we dedicate our work to him. And then you could also say that Cain's sacrifice was harder than Abel's, he had to work the land that was now cursed. It's back-breaking work. My grandpa was a farmer. It was back-breaking work. Watching sheep, you got to nap with them. You got to play with them. You had a lot more time on your hands than you would if you were a farmer, okay? And it just doesn't seem to make sense that God wouldn't accept his offering until you ask yourself this question. How did Abel know before the law told us to bring the firstborn and the fat?
That's what I was wondering.
Yeah.
See,
This is before the law.
it was present.
He brought, I was like, how did he know that?
It was direct communication.
Right. He was in his presence.
Yep. So where he was nothing to everyone else.
He was something to God.
Yep.
Wow, that's so good.
And so he got direct communication of what pleased God. And we know from Hebrews chapter 11 that it was by faith Abel offered, right?
What
So
did Cain offer again?
his the grain, the work of his hands, because he
Okay.
was a farmer. Yeah.
I can't remember.
So Cain presumed that was the offering God wanted because he is the man. You see what I mean? He inflated himself.
Mm-hmm.
Abel, who had no reputation whatsoever, being called nothing, cultivated a relationship with God and knew what offering God wanted. Okay? Now, this is crazy. I think that not only did he get directly, but I think he also learned from his parents. Because remember, in Genesis 3:21, they tried to clothe themselves in fig leaves.
Mm-hmm.
Can you imagine that? I think that was a little bit weird. Like I just had a visual, and I'm like, that's just strange. You have strings for the bra. Like, how did you do that?
Like, fig leaves aren't that big either, so you'd have to put
Right.
a bunch of them
Yeah, a
together.
bunch of them together or find a really large leaf, or leaves. But God personally made them tunics of skin. God performed the first killing or sacrifice.
Mm-hmm.
So that was a covering. And they would have known sacrifice or the letting of blood is what covers. So Cain or Abel would have also remembered that. He might have already had some type of clue that that's what you do, because both brought product from their work. Okay? But only one asked God what he wanted.
Mhm.
So he gave them the sheep, the firstborn, and he also gave him the fat. Now, in the Passion Bible, which I actually remember to bring it today, I'm so proud of myself. In verse 22 of Hebrews 9, it says, actually, nearly everything under the law was purified with blood, since forgiveness only comes through an outpouring of blood. Okay, so there's that tie there as well. But we got to maybe pull that in. Like, why were they doing the offering in the first place? Like, had God already communicated that, forgiveness is maintained by this? Like, why was there an offering?
Well, that's good. I've never even thought of that.
Yeah.
Wow.
So it could be that they knew to do this regularly. I don't know. That's why there's so much out of the story, because if they tried to put it all in there, we would have to have forklifts
Right.
deliver our Bibles up here, right? So even John said that if they were to record all the miracles Jesus did, there were not enough books in the world to contain them all.
Mhm.
So I think that it was either some type of praise and thanksgiving offering, or it might have been tied to some type of forgiveness offering before the law. Okay? So again, context. We're trying to figure out what is going on here. So we know that Cain heard the word and responded with faith. So his offering required a close relationship with God. And we got to be very careful of finishing God's sentences. I am very cautious with that. I don't like, if I feel like I'm supposed to do something or he's talking to me, I'm like, give me more data. What are you talking about here? What response do you need from me to make this occur, or what are you saying here? Or I ask questions. We've got way too many assumptions and conclusions we come to. And that's why we get in situations and we're confused. Didn't God say? Well, did he? Did he say that, or did you add to what he said? Right? Did you add the steps? Did you add all of those things? He didn't say to do it that way. Like, there's so many things that can occur when we add to his sentences. So, Abel...
twist it for our use.
Well, or we just assume, it's like, here's an example. In the Old Testament, if you spit on someone, you were considered unclean because you were spit on. In the New Testament, Jesus spit on a guy's eyes and he saw.
Right.
So we could come to the conclusion that Jesus just did something unclean, and yet a blind man now sees.
Mm-hmm.
So he didn't come to conclusions, he just obeyed.
Mm.
And so I think we have to be very careful, especially in our interpretation. We need to dig around. We need to get the context. There's so many things, because truth is always in the tension of opposing thought.
Mm-hmm.
And if we're not careful, like where Jesus said, you have to hate your mother and father to follow me, that's not what he meant. If you look at the original language, you have to love them less. So it's an order. It's a ranking system. It's a relational issue there. So sometimes I think we do. Sometimes I think we do twist it to our own use or what may be comfortable for us. And we don't want to do the way he's wanting us to do something because there's more risk. But ask questions. I think I've talked about, Zechariah, when he saw the menorah and the two olive, trees. The angels is like, what do you see? And he's like, I don't know. What am I seeing? That is the best question you can ask. Typically, when God's asking you questions, it's not because he needs answers. It's because you do. So that's, come at it from a position of no matter how much word you have or how many patterns or things you have seen, you're like a newbie every time. That's humility. If you're a newbie, every time he tells you something like, it's too big for me, I don't understand it, what are you telling me here? It's so valuable. And it can save us from a lot of nonsense.
It's just like, if you want a student to learn something, you have to let them, it has to click on their own. So by God asking you questions, it makes you think about it so that you have to be like, oh.
Yep, he's a coach.
He's so cool.
He's a coach. He's a strategist. He's Yoda.
Yeah.
Because the hero is always jacked. We're the heroes, right?
Yeah.
He's made us the hero. And so we're jacked, and we need him to guide us to conclusions like Yoda did Luke Skywalker or Gandalf and Frodo. You know what I mean? So he and not only that, but God loves the exchange. He loves the relationship factor because he's extremely relational. So he loves that so much. Like that song that Jen Johnson sings, Can You Stay a Little Longer? Mm-hmm. That is 100% him. In fact, this is a practice I do, if at all possible. I have set times I like to spend with him. And so I will stay a little longer because I know he likes that. Right? So these are things that come from knowing him and knowing what he likes. And Abel did. And I just love it. See, it doesn't matter what people have said or are saying about you.
Thank God.
Even if you're nothing, you're everything to him.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter. And it also doesn't matter if they're praising you, because they can turn around and say, crucify him. Mm-hmm. Your validation isn't in the good or the bad of what people are saying. It's what he is saying and the price paid for you. That is what's very important. So you're extremely valuable to him. Now, when we look at Hebrews 11:4, in the King James it says, by faith, Abel offered to God a more excellent sacrifice than Cain, through which he obtained witness that he was righteous. How are you righteous? By faith. That's how you're righteous. It never has to do with works. Works come from a position of understanding you're righteous now. Okay? Then you do what is right. It's not reverse. If you get into the reverse and you do what's right in order to be righteous, you're now in the law. Okay? So then it says, God testifying of his gifts, and through it, he being dead still speaks. So the phrase more excellent is pertaining to being more appropriate or fitting, better and more acceptable. So when you take that, it is, can you pass this down? It is, by faith, Abel offered to God a sacrifice which was more fitting than Cain's. Why was it fitting? All of the Bible is testifying of one person, Jesus Christ. So God's agenda was to speak of Jesus. Cain's agenda was to speak of Cain. Okay? So what did Jesus say? I don't speak on my own. I only speak what I hear the Father saying, right? So Abel was testifying of the sacrifice of Jesus Christ. And he may not have even known what he was doing. He just knew God wanted the firstborn, Jesus, and the fat, the best part.
Wow.
Isn't that crazy? So it was more fitting to the story of the lamb. Now, I wish I could find this in my notes. So when I first started studying every week, like once a day, it was by hand. You know, it's back in, I mean, did we even have telephones? You know, cars? No, just kidding. So everything was by hand. I'd have all these books on my desk because we didn't have Bible study programs and all the things. And I cannot find my original notes. But let me tell you what the word respect means. So if you can stun God, this is how you stun God. By faith. So what happened is when Cain offered his sacrifice in heaven, the Father sat back on his throne in shock, looked around at everybody in the room and said, did you just see that? It stunned God.
Wow.
That's what Abel did. He stunned him. So that's pretty crazy to me that you can stun him with what you do. And we're, well, doesn't God know everything? He knows people make choices. But that basically he's like, guys, did you just see what Abel did? Like, I mean, that's what he was doing. He was, all the angels, everybody, he's like, bam, because faith was being expressed for the first time since the fall. Okay, and that was the righteous line. You see that coming through. So then it's astonishment. He was stunned. He asked everybody if they saw that. Now, somehow, Cain and Abel are aware of God's response. Did y'all ever wonder that? Like, how did Cain, was there a visible manifestation? How did Cain know that God didn't accept his sacrifice? You know, we know that fire has consumed sacrifice in the past. You know, was there some type of visible sign, or were they given eyes to see what was occurring in the spirit? I don't know. I just know Cain wasn't happy. Okay? So here you've got the firstborn, you've got the champion, you've got the great man, you've got the seed that is going to redeem mankind, and he is rejected by God. Now we have a big problem. Okay? Just so you guys know, I've talked about this before. Rejection is the worst pain the brain can feel. Okay? So it runs along the same neural pathways as physical pain. I think I've told you guys that you can take Tylenol and it actually relieves feelings of rejection. So I want you to take that in mind, where you feel, if you've ever felt intense rejection before, you know what that feels like, right? Now multiply it by the fact you're supposed to be the seed. And then multiply it by the fact that it wasn't just anybody, it was God. Can you imagine? So the rage he felt would have been instant. He would have taken it personally, and that he was rejected, not his offering, because people that are insecure personalize everything. It's always personal. Have y'all noticed that? It is always personal with the insecure. He could not separate that it wasn't him as a person that was rejected. It was his sacrifice. That's why God said, why has your countenance fallen? If you do well, won't you be pleasing? In other words, if you operate from faith, not works, won't you please me? This was an opportunity for Cain to be saved from himself. God was trying to show him, you are not the seed, number one. Number two, you are operating from what you think is great about you, not what is great about me. You're not operating from faith. And because you're not operating for faith, it's setting you up for a huge fall. So then he says that sin was sitting at the door, which is crazy. But listen to this. So very, and we're on page 4, where it says greatly, great, abundance. It takes a sense of exceedingly. So his anger was in abundance and it was exceeding. But the word angry is interesting. It's hurrah. And it means to burn, to be kindled, to glow, to grow warm. And it means to get angry or to become vexed. Now, in one of the sources, it means to burn with anger, have a strong feeling of displeasure, but listen to this, with a focus of an action to follow. So this type of anger requires action. It doesn't go away unless there's action. That's why we have true crime podcasts. Okay? This type of anger. It also means to be in a state of worry and concern as an extension of being internally angry. So what do you guys think he was concerned with? What do you think concerned him most that caused him to just ruminate and be in a cycle?
That he wasn't the seed.
His entire identity
If he
shattered
wasn't the
in front of
seed,
his
then
face.
what was he?
Well, not only was his identity shattered, but his brother, who had always been nothing,
All of a
was
sudden.
elevated above him.
Might be the seed. Who knew? Right
Yep.
At that time.
It really reminds me of like fixed mindset and like how you're not supposed to praise your child for their like when they do something.
For their innate ability, but for their
you're so smart,
efforts.
you're so strong, you're so great, because it creates within them like the unwillingness to work harder, like try to achieve things that aren't easy. And
Yeah.
so it kind of reminds me of that, because like his whole life he'd just been told like you're the special one, and so like the second he wasn't special, it was like
Mm-hmm.
There was no effort or relationship in his offering. It was just like, here you go.
Yeah.
I worked really hard and that was
Exactly.
good.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we got it done.
You're 100% correct. And unless the child is raised by a D, then they might need some praise every once in a while. I remember I was coaching my son a few weeks back, and I said, okay, I want you to think of like one of the first memories where you felt like a sting. And I said, and son, I know you're my kid, so if I did it, I'm cool. And he goes, well, it is you actually. And I was like, okay. So he had, so bad. He had written his first little part of a song, and I think he was about 14 or so. And he played it for me, and this was my response. Y'all are going to gasp, especially you sweethearts. I said, you're going to practice that more, right? Like it's not finished, right?
Definitely do that for you too.
Instead of, and I did say later, but so here's what I was thinking in my defense. It's a good start, but you got more. But I didn't say it's a good start because D's are terrible at starting with the positive.
Yeah.
I'm like, you're going to practice more, right? The poor little thing was obviously crushed, but you know what he did? He worked harder, and he is a top-notch musician. But I was like, so when he told me, I didn't even remember it at first. I'm like, what a horrible thing to say. I said, I'm so sorry. I don't even know how you ended up a good kid. It wasn't because of me. Obviously, it had to be Jesus anointing you to just, and no wonder you didn't marry a wife like me. Like, you got as far away from me as possible. But I did apologize. I said, you actually, it was fine. I couldn't say it was good because I'm not going to lie. But it was fine. But that was the first sting, but he did become very much better. So,
Hey, sister. Are
if
you
they're
one of those people never let your kids win when you're competing against?
100%.
I like
Yeah.
that too.
100%.
I will knock that kid over.
Yeah, it's like life sucks, and you're gonna get, so you need to get hit by mom first, and then I can make you feel better. Other people ain't gonna make you feel better.
I just
But,
don't
yeah.
I mean, when they were little, I might be like, oh, you're so fast.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
But like,
And I actually did compliment him. He'll tell you he had a great childhood. And I would tell him you're smart, but what was interesting is he didn't think he was, and so I was trying to let him know
Yeah.
you are. But
Oh
on
gosh, he's so
there was
smart.
there were other things where I'm like, that's really good, Kent. So he knew if he got my approval or praise, it was a big deal,
Yeah.
and it meant
Actually,
more.
it's true.
So
this was a struggle. I didn't know about the fixed mindset until my kids, I think my youngest was probably 18 months old. So with my youngest, I've been able to implement with her. I always praise her effort versus her ability. So like,
Yeah.
even if I am very impressed with what she did, I'm like, gosh, you worked so hard for that. I'm so glad that it's gotten so good now.
yeah,
And so like I always try to do that, and I've noticed with her versus my older kids, and they do have more fixed mindset, because when they were younger and they do something really amazing, especially my son, because he was just so advanced on everything, I was like, oh my gosh, you're so smart, show them, you're so smart.
yeah,
Like constantly, and it was just things that he was naturally good at. So
Yeah.
now it's like anytime he
makes a mistake or feels like he failed, it's life shattering.
he's literally like, I don't want to, like, oh yeah, if it's not easy anymore, like this is just too much, I'm gonna go. Like,
That's like when
if it's not easy, oh, I'm not good at this.
Yes,
and like he just shuts down, like it's
You
like,
don't
he's not good,
understand
but then
there's a
plays it off.
development.
Like
that happened to
My
me.
grandson's like that.
Yeah,
Sorry.
it's hard.
when I was in school
me
is
sad.
effortless, and so it's no big deal.
Yeah.
Well, then when I took a course and learned Facebook ads and ran that first one, and it was crickets,
Yeah.
it took me 5 months
To run
to
another-
get deparalyzed.
Yeah.
I just couldn't get past it. And that's when I understood the Lord told me, you expected mastery on something that you've never done before because of your schooling. And I'm like, oh, so I'm not an idiot. He's like, no, you're untrained.
Yeah.
So yeah, and I got so many compliments as a kid, and the teachers loved me and all of that. And so the minute I couldn't do something right off the bat, it was a huge hit.
Yeah, and it's so hard because then it's just like you internalize that. And with my son, he tries to play cool about everything, but I can tell he really starts to believe like, well, this is just not my thing. Like,
Yeah.
I'm not,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yep.
And it's so hard to.
And that's the
Get that out of
inflate
them.
deflate. You know what I mean? It's like it was so easy, it came so easy, and now, yeah, I could see that. That's good. Did you have something, or did you say it? Okay. Well, this anger is also one that is only relieved by murder in the original language, and that's exactly what he did. And then when we look at how to please God, obviously it's with faith. But all of this was way too much for Cain. He couldn't take it. And so the champion actually ended up killing his own brother. But I want you to, where you have that, let me see where it is. In verse 7, where it says, if you do well, will you not be accepted? And if you don't do well, sin lies at the door. The idea behind that, the mental imagery in the Hebrew, is a lion on it's crouching, getting ready to attack. It's a personification of sin as a lion. Well, we have here in 1 Peter 5, be sober, be vigilant, because your adversary, the devil, walks about like a roaring lion seeking whom he may devour. Resist him steadfast in the faith, knowing that the same sufferings you're experiencing by your brotherhood in the world are being experienced. So sin longed for him. So we need to understand that, like we've talked about, we're tempted to sin because of what's in our heart. James is clear on that. But that doesn't mean there's not a supernatural entity or entities that are trying to push us over the edge. So just like the serpent, tink, they're already standing by the tree. He just gave them the argument for them to say yes to eat from that tree. So sin is looking for people to devour. But I want you to notice the play on words. Lion. The access the lion uses is when we believe lies. Okay, that's what he's looking for. Behaviors and speech that are evidence we're believing lies. If you look at the start of all sin, it was believing a lie. So wherever you're struggling, there's a lie that's being believed. And so that's where the enemy can come in and cause us to do things we would normally not do. So I always like to trace the lie down. That's what I do. Okay. And so sure enough, he didn't resist him. His ego took too much of a hit. And it's sad too, because he actually went to the land of Nod, which sounds like something on Lord of the Rings. Every time I say it, I crack up. But he goes to the land of Nod. There's people there, and from him actually came great civilizations, musicians, weaponry. The first armory was developed by his descendants. So he was called to be a leader. He just wasn't the seed. So we're still in this battle between the enemy's seed and God's seed, and we of course know that Jesus is the seed. But from Cain's line came the anti-God, anti-Christ line, okay? And then, of course, Jesus crushed the enemy's head. So we have the two examples. We got Adam and Eve, who were blind to who they already were, which was deflated identity. And then we've got Cain, who thought too highly of himself, so he had inflated identity. True wisdom is to see yourself as heaven sees you and agree with that assessment. No more, no less. Humility is saying what God is saying about you. And if we keep identity that simple, we're not going to yield to fear, and we also won't yield to anger or rejection.
Sherri, do you see that one of the other things I see in that is not just identity, but to not be deceived, you're questioning your purpose, and I think purpose is so important.
Yeah, that is a great example, because if I was in Cain's position, I can't say I wouldn't have done the same thing, honestly, because not only was his identity shattered, but his purpose.
Yeah.
So that's very hard to take. Like when I found out what my husband did, and I realized I was gonna have to divorce him, that was one of my first questions when I was in the hotel room pacing back and forth. I'm like, okay, not only do I have to disentangle myself from 31 years, but how does this impact my purpose? What does that look like? Because when it's tied, right, and then all of a sudden it's not, so you've got this situation his whole life, he had one single purpose. Well, the other example is Solomon. Solomon's purpose, he thought, was to build the temple only. That was David's directive to Solomon. It was David's heart, right? Solomon, that was part of his purpose, but not all of it. So once he completed the temple, what happened? He fell off. He lost his ever-loving mind. Married who would want that many women? You know what I mean? I'm a woman, and I cannot put up with too many at one time myself. So all the gods he began to worship, all the things that happened, I firmly believed that he lost the reason he was born and alive, and then he had nothing. The other thing is, he wrote about it in Proverbs. Without vision, the people perish, or without prophetic vision, the people cast off restraint. He is proof that you can preach all day, you can teach all day, you can write books. You can become one of the most popular ministers in the nation and not live by what you wrote. Because gifting is totally separate from who you are as a person.
Okay.
So yeah, I think Cain's whole purpose and his reason for existence blew up in his face, just like Solomon. That's a good one.
This last couple of years of trying to figure out why am I here? What is because lots of things that happen, and even feeling like my multiple sclerosis was like a punishment that I opened up, not that God would do it to me, but I opened myself up by making mistakes to receive this, and God is like, whoa.
Mm-hmm.
The only reason you're here is to love and to receive love. It's only about love, and that's it. It's just love, and love is relationship, and God is love. And so if you're in that face-to-face relationship with him, all the other stuff just falls away. You're just gonna be walking in your purpose because you're in relationship with the one who sees it all anyway.
Yeah, and that's something that is an important question to answer, and I'm glad you brought it up, because if you want to know why you were born, I mean, Paul talks a lot about you were called to persecution. That's actually in the, I think, Philippians or Galatians, it's actually God doing you a favor when you, in the Greek, God has granted you the opportunity to face persecution, because can you imagine a bunch of entitled, spoiled little brats? In fact, we probably see them all the time, right? So you have to have some type of challenge in your life. But here's the other thing. You're definitely called to love. But I always tell people, what are you most passionate about? Because passion means of the Father. So desire is sourced in Father, typically. If you're a Christian. Now, sometimes we can have desire sourced in, stuff that's not Him. But when I've had to do this with people that started off from a negative, where their childhood was so traumatic that they weren't told they could do it anything they put their mind to, they weren't told those things. They're just trying to survive until adulthood, right? And so they're like, I don't know what I want. I don't know what I was called to do. So I tell them, when are you in the zone? When time stops, everything falls away, and you are doing what you love. That might be what you're called to. Or at the very least, you can use that to reach other people creatively. So what are your giftings? What are you good at encouraging? Give your life to that. Are you good at giving? Give your life to that. So definitely having that purpose is important. Yeah. And, those questions can be very helpful. I remember when I was a kid, I wanted to be a teacher, and then I decided I wouldn't like kids. Then I wanted to be a detective, but I decided I'd be bored sitting in the car doing surveillance. Then I decided, I want to work at a store, cause I like cash registers. And then I wanted to be an author. So I've worked in a store. I have a true crime podcast, and I teach all the time. And I don't have 2 little kids. So that's, I like kids actually now. Back then I didn't. And then I've written books. So you're going to probably find that you do things on some level that you wanted to do as a kid. So, I know it's kind of off topic, but in a way it's not.
Well, it's not, because I really am trying to figure out, right now I know I'm in the season of, I had to, years ago, you were there, God's like, hey, sugar and health, get your, let's do the food thing. Hey, maybe Dad, I'd always hear all this stuff, and I'm like,
you're in healing.
Complete broke down, but now I'm in healing mode.
Yeah.
But I'm like, I want to work for myself. I need to make money somehow, even though money is a made up thing that's used to control each other, and I hate it. It's stupid. Once you wake up to that, you're all like, that's stupid. But I also know, I was like, I have to make money to provide and stuff, and I was like, well, God, let's do this the right way. Let me get I need to stay in my health mode. I can't be wandering off all this. I got to be present in the moment. But I also have been learning what is it that I really love. And I think it's anything creative, anything where I can create something out of something.
Yeah.
Music, art, putting events together, bringing, I love food. I like
bringing people together for a good cause.
So God is showing me the things that I'm good at, but now instead of it being my identity, it's just stuff it's skills that I have. It's just stuff that I'm good at.
That you can serve others well with.
Exactly. Instead of it being you never feel imposter syndrome, you never feel quite good at, I'll get something going, and then all of a sudden I'm like, oh no, I can't do this. And I'm like, oh, I'm gonna mess it up, or I'm gonna say the wrong thing.
And you can start small as well.
Exactly.
Yeah. Destiny?
I really love the, your gifts and talents plus your divine burden is your calling.
Mm-hmm.
So
divine burden.
So something that God frequently puts on your heart that you, for you, just hearing when you talk, I would say you have a heart for mental health and physical health, and then you have gifts of cooking and being creative, and so you somehow try to combine those two.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you can also here's another clue as well that can sound counterproductive, but what tees you off. So this is actually from a dream
Poisonous food
that a guy had, where you had the golf tee and you hit the tee, and the Lord was showing him what tees you off is probably your call too. So like if children being harmed
Yeah.
ticks you off more than anything else, you're probably, that's where you need to help, either volunteer or start
Yeah, call
something
that
or whatever it
divine
is.
This
Yeah.
is explaining a lot.
Yeah. I bet it, yeah. There's a lot that tease me off, but there's certain areas.
Where you're like,
But yeah, what the burden, what causes you distress when you see it is probably there as well. So like for me, it's very, very important that the saints are equipped. Like that is, if you ask me one thing that I do, it is equipping the saints. And it tees me off when leaders do not equip the saints and they actually disempower them. So if you want to see me angry, that's when I will get angry. Or messing with Holy Spirit's presence, which poor Elizabeth have seen. But yeah, I don't like when saints are talked down to. I don't like when they're told they're going to fail. I don't like when they're told they're sinners, because we're not anymore. I don't like any of that. And I don't like where they're controlled and manipulated. And so, yeah, that kind of stuff will make me angry, because we are a nation of kingdom citizens that are supposed to take over spheres of influence, not be told we can't do anything.
Yeah.
So that's a big thing for me. And then politics, there's a lot that tees me off there.
Well, I don't think we should get stuck on just, we all want to know what's the one big thing, what's
Yeah.
one big call, and the truth is it can be multiple
It
things
can.
over multiple years.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And so God may want to use you for more than just one big thing.
Oh,
In
100%.
different ways at
So-
different times.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, I definitely have times where it's been different purposes that now, like when I worked in youth, loved it. But now I have no interest in that. But there are some things that have stuck with me my whole life. Like I can see these are, like, what about you guys? I mean, what are you, like what kids
Anything harmful to a child,
really
Yeah.
upset
it
you?
really
Yep,
hurts my hide.
yeah.
I'm all like, yeah, just kill them.
Goodness.
Abortion, anything
Yeah.
harming a child.
Defenseless, yeah,
Yeah.
that's good.
That one gets me going too.
Anybody else? What do you think I mean, definitely business.
So what can I do about that?
Well, I mean,
You can't kill them. That's
you
what
can't
God
kill them,
said.
Dorena, okay?
Thou shalt not kill.
Yeah.
I would say anytime you can partner with an organization is probably the smallest step. You can always start with your family, right? So if you have any children that you can influence in your family, you're already doing that, right, with your grandkids. But like sex slavery, that does upset me. And so there's a ministry, I think it's called A21, that I like to give to. So you can do that or volunteer. Equip yourself and then ask the Lord to give you opportunities. I know when I worked with youth, it was so crazy. Everywhere we go, it didn't matter where it was in the country. If I traveled, youth were always right there. If I was standing in line at a store, they're talking to me. And I'm like, what are they talking to me? I'm an old person. I don't understand what's happening. I remember being at the Cracker Barrel with me and my ex, and we were in line waiting to get seated, and there were like random teenagers didn't even know each other. And before you knew it, we're all in a conversation. And I'm like, that's the anointing. They're attracted to that and they know I love them. So I would just ask for opportunities for God to give you. And you may find yourself just stumbling into an opportunity to serve. But for sure, giving, educating yourself, and volunteering if possible. Anybody else?
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I do get really mad about the food situation in America.
Oh, I hate it. The food
I
industry.
just started following this chick called the Food Babe or something,
Mm-hmm.
and she's right now just got 400,000 signatures for a petition for Kellogg to stop putting a bunch of junk in our food when they don't put it in other countries.
Yep. Like even the can of soup, bioengineered. It's on Campbell's.
They wouldn't even meet with her. She was sitting outside. I called, so she put a number and said like demand that they meet with me, and I was like, this is awkward, but I'm gonna do it. So I like called and I was like, but they wouldn't even meet with her.
Yeah.
And it's just like so infuriating.
Well,
That
Yeah.
makes me really mad too.
Even at the farmer's market in Portales, there's one bigger grower shack place that they kind of